Wow, that's loud. Our first vignette comes from the second generation, and I invite at this time Billy Palmer and Baker.
So we're doing this program for Pake and Beppe. And as we were talking about it, we asked ourselves, what is it about Pake and Beppe that most of you kids, younger generation, don't know? Because when you look at Pake and Beppe, you see this older, regal, royal nobility, people who had been married for 65 years, and they look like they're normal. But you weren't raised by them, and Nance and I were, and so we want to tell you, first of all, it doesn't look like, it wasn't what it looks like now. Pake and Beppe were very, very unique as a mom and dad. They were absolute trendsetters, what we call mavericks. You see, in their day, certain things were expected, certain cultures were expected. A husband was expected to play a certain role, especially if he was a pastor or a dominee, and the wife was expected to play the submissive, quiet, maybe she played the organ, wife role. And Pake and Beppe did not really care what the culture told them to do. What they really cared about was what Jesus was telling them to do. And so they approached their life in a very unique way. And one of the things that they did, you understand, in that day, the church was like hallowed ground. It was like holy. Kids did not run through the sanctuary. Kids did not ride like their bikes around. It was very sacred. And where Pake and Beppe raised us was called the parsonage. And that was also holy ground. So if you were a Dutch housewife, you were expected to keep a very clean house, and it should just run a certain way. But that was not my mom. Every parsonage was turned into a farm, goats and sheep and dogs and guinea pigs and rabbits. It was turned into a machine shop, because she did all of her own mechanical work. Imagine that. The lawnmowers pulled apart. Usually the dryer and the washer were pulled apart. And it was because my mom was fixing it. It was turned into a psychiatric office because over the ironing, my mom would pray with community women and minister to them. And it was turned into a counseling center where people would come as families, and they would, in the middle of 8 kids and all the mayhem, they would minister to people. Pake and Beppe were very unique. And it's set a very different and a very high standard for the rest of us who follow them. My dad had this crazy idea that whenever God gave a woman to a man, he had one job where she was concerned. And that was to provide an environment in which his wife could blossom. And so my dad, even though there was a lot of pressure put on him to do things a certain way, loved my mom doing life her way and ministering her way. Made a huge impact on all of us, whether we were sons or daughters, for what God would have for us as we came up. We thought about what would be a good way to show you kids just how unique our life was. And as we talked about it, we said, probably the thing that would express how different our life was would be a typical dinner time scene. And our dinner times, none of this stuff have we made up. All of this stuff we have literally cut and pasted out of the history books to show you tonight exactly what our life was like. Because while my dad never knew a a stranger. Whether you're buying an appliance, or you're filling up your gas tank, or you're getting your groceries, buying your milk, he never knew a stranger. And my mom's job it was to embrace every stranger with great enthusiasm. And she did that very well, filling their bellies so often with homemade bread and all kinds of other love and care. So what we've decided to do for you tonight, especially for the great-grandkids and the grandkids, is to reenact a dinner time scene at the Tadema household. So in order to do that, I'm going to narrate what may have happened, and I'm going to have various ones of you act it out. So let's have Art be Papa. Take your chair up here, Art, and be Papa.
All right, Art.
And let's have Rainy be Beppe.
Ready, all right, go Rainy. Yeah, ready.
And let's have She'll be Thelma.
Go Shiloh, all right.
And let's have Darcy and Nancy.
Go Darcy, all right.
Okay. Who is the most beautiful person in this room? Female.
Yes, you are.
Okay, Summer, you come to me. Okay, let's have McKenna, Squeezy Laura. And Ty, Joe to be Dan.
Go, go. All right. Go.
Tyler to be Kelvin.
All right, Tyler.
John to be Harold.
Good job. All right.
Jessica. You got a baby, sorry. Melissa Stoddard. You come to be Billy. Okay, now this is going to be pure improv. So I will give the story. What? We never said that. Oh my goodness, where's Harris? Harris, where's Harris? Harris, you come be Cliff. So those of you who don't know my birth family, how it went was Pake and Beppe, the oldest is Thelma, and then Nancy, and then Laura, and then Cliff Harrison, and then Calvin, and then Daniel, and then Billy, and then Harold. Yeah, come. This is actually a typical table at the Tadema household. But what you'll discover is that it's only the beginning of a typical table. So I will say what is going on, and as I do, the actors here will act it out. Okay? So it's time for the meal to start. Everybody is sitting at the table, and Papa holds out his hands to begin the prayer. Everybody holds hands on it. Just before they begin to say the prayer, Beppe jumps up and says, wait a minute. I have a new prayer for us to pray. And then she instructs Daniel to go and get the salt and hymnal. Daniel brings the salt and hymnal to Great Beppe, and she says, I was meditating today on the Psalms in the hymnal, and I think this is what we should learn. She smiles benignly at the group while they patiently wait, holding hands, and she begins to walk them through 7 verses of Dwell in Me, O Blessed Spirit. They repeat after her.
Dwell in me, O blessed Spirit. The most divine. And the way of life eternal. Keep this heart of mine. Round the cross. Where thou hast led me. Or up. Amen.
Just as they're getting ready to begin passing out the food, there's a knock at the door. All of the kids jump up as though they're going to get the door, and Papa slams his hand on the table and says, sit down.
Sit down.
He instructs Selma to go to the door. Selma goes to the door and opens it to reveal Dorothy Moore, which is Andy. And Moore. Now, what you need to know about Dorothy Moore is Papa and Beppe met her in some random place, and while she was a very intelligent and extremely wealthy woman, she also dressed and appeared like a homeless beggar and had a smell that was overwhelming. And Beppe loved her. All of the kids rolled their eyes as Selma opened the door a little bit wider and ushered Dorothy inside. She was holding a dead, freshly plucked chicken in her hands. Beppe jumped up, smiled and greeted her. She said, Nancy, please take this chicken to the kitchen. She gave Dorothy a big hug, while Papa extended a hand as far as he could to repel the hug and kiss, and he shook her hand. Then Beppe said to Harold, why don't you give Dorothy your chair and you go get another?
Why don't you get another chair, Carol? Please give Dorothy yours.
As everybody got settled around the table again, even Nancy, Papa glanced over and noticed that Laura had put the crust from her bread alongside the table. And he said to her sternly, Laura, why did you put the crust on the table?
Why is that crust on the table?
Laura batted her eyelids and looked pathetically at Paka. And she said to him, "But Paka,
Dad,
I was only saving it for Shep."
I was only saving it for Chef.
Paka said, "That is not an excuse."
No excuses.
Laura smiled winningly, and she said, "Remember, Jesus said even the dogs should get the crust."
Jesus said Chef deserves the crust.
Papa's nostrils began to twitch. His eyes began to twinkle. Laura sensed victory, and she looked over at him and said, "Coochie goo." Papa started laughing, and everybody erupted in laughter. Just then, the doorbell rang again. What, Riley? Okay. Again, the family jumped up to see who was there, and Papa said,
Sit down.
and instructed Donna to go to the door.
Elma.
There was the Blakesley family. Patty Blakesley with 7 children. Everybody was excited to see them because Patty was Becca's best friend, except for Paka. Patty, Kate, came in and Becca jumped up and gave her a big hug. And she ran over and gave which he could hardly take. The meal finished, and Papa got out the family Bible. He said, "Does anybody have a special scripture they'd like to read tonight?"
Any preferences?
And Daniel said, Psalm 117, whereby everybody else started laughing because they knew it was the shortest chapter in the Bible.
Okay, we'll read the whole book of Leviticus then.
Which is exactly what Papa would have said. Then Beppe chimed in and she said, "Ritz, could Cliff read Numbers 6:24 as a blessing over all of the people that God has brought to our table?"
Yes,
There it is. Thank you, Cliff.
okay, let's read Numbers 6:24.
When he was finished reading that, Papa said, when he finished reading that, Calvin jumped up and said, "I have a blessing I'd like to read over my sister."
Can I read a blessing for my sister?
Everyone was shocked and horrified because they knew Calvin really didn't even like his sisters.
And then Calvin read Psalm 8:8.
We have a little sister, and she has no breasts. What shall we do for our sister?
Laura jumped up and began to beat on Calvin, and Billy picked her nose and put it on him. Papa slapped the table and said, "Enough of that.
Enough of that.
There's work to be done." Becca handed out jobs. Everybody picked up their chairs and went home.